All right, so made a little bit of progress on this thing. My voice has been kind of shot over the last couple days, so I haven't really filmed or recorded or talked much. But engine and transmission are back in. This will be the last time that it's going back in. I've just been knocking out some of the little stuff. I did replace this coil wiring, put a new harness in there, and I didn't even notice this right away. Someone pointed out in the comments that these are actually different sets of coils. One's the heatsink coil and one is not the heatsink coil. So I don't know if I'm going to do anything with that, if I'll go get like another set and swap them out. I do have a set of the heatsink coils, but those are all rusted out and in worse shape than that. So if I do anything, I'll probably go pick up a set like this from the junkyard or something, but not sure what I'm going to do with that one yet. Got the power steering lines all finished. Put the new thermostat housing on it, and I did put a 160-degree thermostat in there. I don't know what was actually in there before, but I just went ahead and put a 160 in it because I wasn't sure. I am just going to reuse this top hose that came on the car. I did verify that there is actually a bead underneath this little heat shrink portion, so that should be okay. I did go ahead and use a P-clamp on the back side of the head there for the transmission dipstick, so that comes out at an angle that's manageable. It is a tight fit, but I was able to use a P-clamp, and then what I did was I used a piece of like heater hose inside the P-clamp just to give it a little bit of extra cushion and tighten it up a little bit more so the dipstick isn't pinched in there, but it does actually still come out and function. I did verify the calibration on the dipstick, so the dipstick full level is actually in the right spot on the stick. Just did a little loop here for the steam vent. And this is the crossover that was on the car. I did go ahead and put some RTV under there because only one side had the gasket. The other side was missing the gasket, but that might have fallen off when I took it off. So I did throw some RTV in there. So this part is actually kind of satisfying because you're knocking out a bunch of little stuff that's really making progress. And I know as I'm doing it, it's going to be the final time that it's assembled, bolted down, tightened. I did get the front billet drive shaft yoke today. I was waiting on the rear, so I got strange front and rear billet yokes for the drive shaft. Once I get the rear section, then I'll bolt it on and actually measure for the drive shaft. Today's Friday, I won't be able to take that until Monday anyway, so not a big deal. But you know you're getting close and you're talking about final assembly, wiring, and drive shaft. So I'm just going to keep plucking away and see where we end up tonight. So, and I did make sure that this is the counterbore yoke. This is the O-ring style output shaft on the Turbo 400. I did go ahead and get the counterbore yoke, so I'll be able to actually seat the yoke about an inch farther into the transmission. The one that was on the car when I came in was a full spline yoke. Doesn't allow you to fully seat the yoke before you pull it out the 1 inch that you need. So it's actually already out too far, and then you pull it out an inch farther. So that'll be fixed up and it'll be stronger. So working on this with the owner, we actually didn't spend money in some other places so we could do the billet yokes. Like he was interested in doing like a different intake and a couple other things to like make more power. But I told him I'd rather see him spend the money on good front and rear yokes on the drive shaft instead of spending money on more stuff that's going to make power right out of the gate. Because if you have a drive shaft yoke failure or a U-joint failure, you're going to wreck a lot of stuff with that power anyway. So sometimes it's not worth it. Just get the good stuff first before throwing power at it. Okay, well actually I did get the rear yoke today too. So I'll throw that thing on and then measure the shaft right away. Just wanted to show the difference between these yokes. So this is the fully splined shaft, and there it pushes in and it hits the O-ring section on the output shaft. So this is fully seated. If I measure from the transmission crossmember to the center of the U-joint, it's about 2 7/8 inches, fully seated. Now if I do my 1 inch pullout and I measure it, it's about 3 7/8 inches. So the center of this U-joint is almost 4 inches from the crossmember here. So now if I use the counterbore yoke, I fully seated in. My fully seated position, center line, is about 2 1/4 inches. So if I do 1 inch pullout, the same 1 inch pullout, I'm going to be at about 3 1/4 inches. You're talking about there's about a 1 inch difference in the drive shaft lengths because of the yoke. So the fully spline yoke with the O-ring output shaft doesn't allow the yoke to be fully seated like it should be before you do the 1 inch pullout. So you're already starting in this position here before you do the 1 inch pullout. So it sticks the U-joint out farther from the output shaft. It gives you less spline engagement. So it kind of opens the door for having some more issues than if you were using the right yoke for the right output shaft. All right, so now I'm going to measure for the shaft, and then I'll measure the travel on the rear axle, see how much the difference is. So First thing I did was fully seat this all the way. And then I'm gonna do like a 7/8 stick out. An inch is usually a good guideline, but I'm gonna go to 7/8. So now I'm gonna measure from the rear yoke where the center of the U-joint would be to the center of the front joint. And that's about 47¼ center to center. And that is with the axle all the way up. The weight of the vehicle is on the axle right now. All right, now we got the axle all the way extended all the way down. And we're at about 46 7/8, maybe just a hair under 47. So we got about 1/4 inch of inward shaft movement, maximum travel on the suspension. So with a 7/8 stick out and 1/4 inch of travel, we should have about 3/8 of an inch of free play in there without it binding. And then the shaft measurement would be the 47¼ with the weight on the axle. So I'll verify that measurement. I'm gonna put the weight back on the axle and remeasure it. There's the measurement again, 47¼ 47¼ So that's what I'll go with for the drive shaft measurement. Then it leaves a little bit of play in there too if there's any error on the drive shaft measurement, but the place that I go to, I've never had any issues with it. It's always like dead accurate. I've never even had one that was 1/8 of an inch off from what I requested. So I'll tell them 47¼ and it'll come back 47¼ All right, so I did do some more assembly on this stuff last night. I got the spark plugs in and gapped. I gapped them all to 20,000s. I'm just gonna be reusing his spark plug wires. They seem like decent wires. I was able to orient them like that with them twisted so they're not actually touching anything. When they came in, they were all over the place and they were like really loose and rubbing on the manifolds everywhere. So I feel like it does actually look kind of cool like that too, but hopefully they stay like that with driving. But we're gonna go with that just so he doesn't have to spend any money on other spark plugs. I do have a 4-inch drive shaft. So this drive shaft is actually from the Ranger when I had the 4-wheel drive on there. So I might see if I can shorten this shaft because this one has to be extended, right? You can't extend the drive shaft. They have to like retube the whole shaft. So you're basically looking at buying a new shaft. I might look at what the price difference would be to just shorten this 4-inch shaft and give them that one instead of having to buy a new one. But other than that, I don't know. I might just keep it. But looking at these shafts, it's pretty interesting because this 3 inches from the Mustang. This one here, the 4 inches from the Ranger, when I had the 4-wheel drive set up on it. So that was after the transfer case, and it's like 55 inches or something like that. All right, it's about 50 inches. So the drive shaft that's in the Ranger now is actually longer than that one because I removed the transfer case and then extended the shaft. So I think the drive shaft in the Ranger is like 66 inches or something like that. So it's pretty long, that's why it's 4-inch. And the guy was kind of cringing a little bit when I told him I wanted to make 1,000 horsepower with it at that length. It's a pretty long shaft. So next I'm gonna be working on the plumbing of the wastegates. I did get all the fittings and stuff on there. And I did do some planning last night, kind of how I want to put the Mac solenoid. So the Mac was over here before, but I don't really want to bring the lines all the way over to the fender and then bring them back over here and split them. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to reuse the line that was already on there. They have like this, he had like this 1/4 inch fuel hose or whatever it is, this stuff here. And it does go down underneath. So I think I'm actually going to put the Mac valve on the block, kind of like right behind the water pump, bolt it on there, run that line straight to the valve, and then I'll put a T going straight to the gates. These turbos do already have a barb right on them, so for the bottom reference, I'm just gonna go from the turbo right to the wastegate, just run a line straight there, and then this line's gonna come down and then tee off, go behind the balancer, and then go to the top of the gates. All right, so changed my mind a little bit on the controller, but I think I like this setup a little bit better. So instead of running this big line all the way down, I just ran this right to here, and I can run the wires straight back from up here instead of lower on the block. Then I was actually able to run this smaller piece down actually in between the head and the alternator bracket. You can see down there, and it actually has a nice space where it's not pinching the line, but it does run through and hold it in place. Then it just comes down to a T right here below the water pump. One goes over to this wastegate, and the other one comes down here over to this one. Does run under the water pump behind the balancer, but it's like 1 inch behind the balancer, so it shouldn't hit. And then I also have it tied off to some of the other lines to pull it back. So the bottom reference comes straight from the turbo to the wastegate, and they're free, not touching anything, not rubbing on anything at all. So that works out pretty slick. This is like, doesn't really need to be mounted to anything because it's actually in there pretty sturdy. Like I can barely move it pushing on it. Then the wires can just kind of get pulled back here and get tucked in with the injector harness. So next thing I'm gonna do is the feed lines. Not really anything special there. Just gonna route them the same way that they were originally when they came in. Then other than that, it's just putting the lower radiator hose on, which I still got to get yet, reconnecting the intercooler to the intake, and then we're good to start wiring. So next video should be wiring, which is pretty cool. So I'll get some fluids in it, start wiring it, so I might be able to do a test fire with it this week.